As the night deepened and the stars above sparkled with the kind of quiet brilliance that only the wide-open skies of Heartland could offer, the feeling of peace that had settled over them seemed to linger in the air, gentle but unshakable. The barn doors creaked open as Amy and Lindy stepped inside, the familiar sights of the horses stirring quietly in their stalls. The soft snort of a horse, the low rustle of hay, these small details grounded them in the present, offering a moment of comfort in the routine of their lives. Amy glanced at Lindy, who was standing beside her, her eyes still bright with a new understanding, a hint of the strength that Ty had always believed she would find within herself. It wasn't just the horses or the barn that had helped them carry the weight of their grief. It was the land itself, the constant heartbeat of Heartland, that had been their silent companion through the darkest days. "We're here," Amy said quietly, as if the statement held more than just the fact that they had arrived home. It was a reminder, too, that no matter how far they traveled, emotionally or physically, they would always find their way back here, to this place that had held their memories, their love, and now their hope for the future. Lindy nodded, her gaze shifting to the barn's loft, where the faint light of the moon filtered through the windows, casting shadows on the wooden beams. For a moment she looked lost in thought, her mind perhaps wandering to the past, to the days when Ty had been there, working beside them, making their lives whole. And yet, Amy could see something new in her daughter's eyes, a flicker of something that was slowly replacing the grief. It was hope, a quiet kind of hope that didn't rush, but simply existed, softly in the background, like the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. "It's hard to imagine life without him," Lindy said softly, her voice barely a whisper against the stillness of the barn. "But I guess we'll find a way." Amy felt the weight of her daughter's words. It wasn't just a simple truth. It was a realization, an understanding that had been built over years of loss and love, of coming to terms with the fact that some things could never be fixed, only carried forward. Amy's heart swelled with pride, knowing that Lindy was beginning to understand that even in the face of loss, life could still be beautiful, still be full of possibility. "We will," Amy replied, her voice steady, full of quiet conviction. "Not because it's easy, but because we're stronger than we know, and because Ty would want us to live fully just as he did. He wouldn't want us to get stuck in the past, even if we remember him every single day." Lindy looked up at her mother, the sadness still there but tempered with something else, something that resembled peace. "Yeah," she said softly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "He'd want us to keep going, to make the most of the time we have." Amy's heart warmed, and for a moment she felt like Ty was right there beside them, as if his spirit was still woven into the very fabric of the ranch, in every corner of the barn, in the quiet rhythm of life that had continued on despite the ache they all carried. The quiet, soft sounds of the barn wrapped around them like a familiar embrace. The barn doors closed with a gentle thud behind them, and Amy turned to Lindy, pulling her close for a quiet moment of stillness, a moment of connection, before they stepped forward into the unknown future. The journey ahead would not be without its struggles, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like it was something they could face together. And as Amy and Lindy stood there, holding each other, they knew that even though Ty was gone, his love, his memory, and the lessons he had taught them would always remain. They were ready to face whatever came next, not because the pain had vanished, but because they had learned that love wasn't something you could lose. It was something you carried with you through every storm, every sunrise, and every new day. The screen fades to black, the sound of hooves in the distance fading gently into the night. The title, Heartland 2025 Coming Soon, appears across the screen, leaving the audience with a sense of anticipation, a quiet knowing that the journey and the healing were far from over. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow across the landscape, as if the world itself was acknowledging their pain and offering a moment of quiet reflection. Amy stood up slowly, her legs stiff from kneeling, and turned to face Lindy. The small girl had already wiped the tears from her eyes, but the faint traces of sorrow remained in her gaze. They had done all they could here. Ty's memorial would always be a place for them to come back to, but today they had given him their love, their grief, and their memories. It was time to let go. At least, a little. Amy exhaled softly, feeling the weight of the moment. "You know, Lindy," she began, her voice steady but soft, "I think he would want us to live, to keep moving forward, even when it feels impossible." Lindy turned to face her, her expression softening. "But how? How do we live without him, Mom?" Amy took a step closer, placing her hand on Lindy's shoulder, feeling the warmth of her small frame. The question was one she had asked herself, countless times ever since that day Ty had been taken from them. The truth was, Amy didn't have all the answers. Some days she didn't know how to keep going either. But she did know one thing. She couldn't let Ty's memory fade. She couldn't let the love they had shared slip away into the past. It had to live on, not just in her heart, but in every action, every moment of kindness, and every new memory they made together. "We carry him with us, Lindy," Amy said, her voice stronger now. "Every time we laugh, every time we hold on to each other, every time we do something good, we carry his spirit forward. He's a part of us, and that's never going to change." Lindy didn't speak, but Amy could see the spark of understanding in her eyes. It wasn't the kind of comfort that erased the grief. It wasn't the kind of hope that took away the ache. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. They stood there for a few more moments, just taking in the beauty of the land around them. Amy felt a peace settling in, not the kind of peace that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from accepting that Ty's love wasn't gone, just transformed into something different. His absence left a hole, yes, but it also left a legacy. Finally, Amy pulled Lindy into another hug, the two of them standing in the quiet light of the evening, wrapped in the warmth of each other's presence. "We'll be okay," Amy whispered into her daughter's hair, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in her soul. "We'll be okay because we have each other, and we have Ty with us always." They lingered there for a moment longer, savoring the connection before slowly turning away. As they walked back to the truck, the sun finally set, leaving behind a canvas of soft pinks and purples in the sky. The horizon had changed, but the world kept turning, and so would they. It wasn't the end of their journey. It was just the beginning of learning to live with the love they had lost and the love they still had to give. The truck's engine hummed softly as they drove away, the road winding beneath the wheels, leading them back toward Heartland. But the journey they had just begun wasn't about the distance between here and there. It was about the space they had just created within themselves, a space that once felt too full of grief, now gently giving way to something else, something lighter. Hope. Amy glanced over at Lindy, who had her face pressed against the cool window, watching the world outside. Her expression had shifted. The tightness that had once gripped her features now softened, but Amy could still see the lingering sadness in her eyes. The pain wouldn't disappear overnight, that much was certain, but it felt like a quiet understanding had settled between them, a promise to keep moving forward, one small step at a time. Lindy broke the silence, her voice small but steady. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again, Mom?" Amy's heart squeezed, but she gave a small smile, a smile that was more for herself than for Lindy. "I think we'll be okay, sweetie. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, But someday, it won't always hurt this much. Lindy didn't reply right away. The quiet of the truck wrapped around them again, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was a shared moment, a brief pause in the whirlwind of life. It was as if they were both looking at the same horizon, the same future. But neither of them knew exactly what it would look like. And yet somehow that uncertainty didn't feel as scary anymore. The weight of Ty's absence still hung in the air, but it didn't feel as heavy as it once did. Maybe it was because in that small, quiet moment at the memorial, Amy had allowed herself to believe in the possibility of healing, that even in the darkest places, there could be light. "You know, Mom," Lindy said softly, her voice tinged with hope. "I think Dad would be proud of us, of what we're trying to do, even if we're not perfect." Amy's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected those words to come from Lindy, but they were exactly what she needed to hear. It was as if her daughter had taken the weight of her own grief and found a way to pass it back to her in the form of a gift, a moment of peace, a glimmer of strength. Amy reached over, placing her hand gently on Lindy's. "He would be so proud of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And he would be proud of us together. We'll keep going, Lindy. We'll keep going because that's what he would want." Lindy looked up at her with a soft smile, her eyes a little less heavy. The road ahead was still long, and they both knew there would be hard days ahead. But for the first time in a long time, Amy felt the faintest stirrings of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that erases the pain, but the kind that says, "I'm not alone in this. We're not alone." As the truck rumbled over the familiar road, the final light of day faded behind them, giving way to the quiet darkness of night. And in that dark, under the blanket of stars, there was a sense of possibility. Maybe they didn't have all the answers yet, but Amy knew one thing for sure. They would be okay. Together, they would find a way to heal, one step at a time. The night had settled in by the time they reached Heartland, the first stars blinking into existence across the sky, like tiny beacons of hope. The world felt still, peaceful in a way that only comes after a storm has passed, leaving behind the promise of something new. The truck pulled slowly up the familiar gravel driveway, its headlights casting long shadows across the ranch. But this time, as Amy stepped out of the vehicle, something felt different. There was a quiet strength in the air, a sense of calm that wasn't there before. Lindy slipped out of the truck behind her, her small figure standing still as she looked back toward the horizon. Amy paused for a moment, watching her daughter, wondering if she could feel it too. The shift, the change. The weight of the day was still there, but there was a lightness in their steps now, a subtle shift in their hearts. They had come to say goodbye in their own way, to release the grief and pain that had held them captive for so long. And though they hadn't fully let go, they had taken the first steps toward healing. "Do you feel that?" Amy asked softly, her voice barely a whisper in the cool evening air. Lindy turned to her, a small, uncertain smile on her face. "Yeah," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's like we're starting to be okay." Amy nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. The words felt right, but they were fragile, like glass that could shatter with the slightest touch. They weren't whole yet, not by a long shot. The grief would always be there, a part of them, woven into their lives like an invisible thread. But for the first time in a long time, Amy felt like they were moving forward, not leaving the past behind, but learning to carry it with them. They walked toward the barn, their footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The ranch looked the same, as it always had, the familiar sight of the old buildings and fields stretching out under the vast, starlit sky. But tonight, there was a sense of new beginnings in the air. The land that had held so many memories now seemed to cradle them, offering a place to heal, to grow, and to remember. I think Ty would be proud of how far we've come, Amy said, her voice steady now, no longer trembling with sadness but with a quiet pride. Lindy didn't respond immediately, but her gaze softened as she looked out at the ranch. It wasn't just a place, it was home. A home they had built together with Ty, with love, with loss, and now with the understanding that they were still here, still moving forward. As they reached the barn, Amy turned to Lindy one last time. You know it's okay to miss him. It's okay to still feel the sadness. But we can keep living, sweetie. He wouldn't want us to stop because he's gone. He'd want us to live fully, just like he did. Lindy nodded, her eyes bright with the understanding that only came from having lived through loss. I know, Mom, she said quietly, and we will. We'll keep living. We'll keep making him proud. Amy smiled, the weight in her chest lighter than it had been in years. That's all we can do, she said softly, wrapping her arm around her daughter's shoulders as they walked together into the night. That's all we can do. And as they entered the barn, the familiar smell of hay and horses surrounding them, Amy knew that their journey wasn't over. But it was beginning to feel like the road ahead would be a little easier to walk, one step at a time, as they continued to carry the love they had for Ty with them, forever and always. The air feels heavier today, as if the land itself remembers the ones we've lost. The past lingers in the shadows, and yet hope rises in the hearts of those who remain. In the wide open spaces of Heartland, grief isn't just a moment. It's a journey. And sometimes, to heal, you have to face the memories head-on. Today, Amy and Lindy returned to the place where their hearts were torn apart, to find a way to move forward without forgetting what they've lost. This isn't just a visit, it's a chance to say goodbye and to keep the love alive. Amy's truck rolled gently across the dusty gravel road, its wheels crunching softly beneath the weight of the silence between mother and daughter. The landscape outside stretched endlessly, fields of green and gold blending into the horizon. But today, it wasn't the beauty of the land that held their attention. It was the journey they were on, a journey that led them back to Ty, to the man they both loved and lost far too soon. Amy glanced over at Lindy, her daughter sitting quietly beside her. The girl had grown up so much in the past few years, yet Amy could see the same quiet sadness in her eyes. The kind of sadness that came from missing someone, even when you didn't know how to put it into words. Amy's heart ached. It wasn't just her pain anymore. It was Lindy's, too. Together they had learned to live without Ty, but the emptiness he left was something they could never fill. Are you okay? Amy's voice was soft, almost afraid to break the stillness. Lindy nodded, slowly, her fingers fidgeting with the corner of her seatbelt. I'm okay. Just thinking. Her words were quiet, but the weight behind them spoke volumes. Amy knew she didn't need to say anything more. The thoughts were the same: grief, longing, and the fear of moving forward without Ty. Amy reached over and squeezed Lindy's hand gently. She didn't have to say the words. Her touch was enough to show that she was there, that they were in this together. The truck drove on, and in the distance, they could see the place where the land changed, where the familiar hills gave way to the quiet spot they had avoided for so long. The memorial. Amy's breath caught in her chest. It felt like it had been a lifetime since they had come here. Yet, every visit was the same, bittersweet and full of memories, both good and painful. This is it, Amy whispered as the truck slowed. Lindy looked out the window, her eyes tracing the outline of the small stone monument standing in the distance. It wasn't much, just a simple marker. But to Amy, it was everything. It was where Ty had been laid to rest, where they could still talk to him, even though he was no longer physically there. Amy didn't know if the ache would ever go away, but she knew it would always be part of her. With one last glance at Lindy, Amy put the truck in park, the engine's hum fading into the quiet of the land. The time had come. It was time to face the memories, to face their grief, and perhaps to heal. As the truck came to a halt, the weight of the moment seemed to hang in the air. Amy sat there for a moment, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her gaze fixed on the distant memorial. She didn't want to get out. Not yet. Not when the memories still felt so raw, like a wound that hadn't fully healed. It would have been easier to turn away, to drive back to the ranch and pretend like this visit wasn't happening. But she knew that running from the pain wouldn't bring them any peace. She glanced at Lindy, her heart breaking at the sight of her daughter. Lindy's small hands clutched the seatbelt, her knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, her expression unreadable. Amy didn't need to ask if she was ready. She could feel it. They were both ready, even if it didn't feel that way. Lindy's voice broke the silence. "Do you think he's proud of me?" The question was simple, but the way it was asked carried years of unspoken longing. Amy's chest tightened. She had asked herself the same question countless times. Would Ty be proud of the woman Lindy had become? Would he be proud of the young girl standing beside her, now growing into someone so strong, even though they both carried the weight of a loss that never seemed to fade? Amy reached over, brushing a strand of hair from Lindy's face, and smiled softly. "Of course he is," she said gently, her voice shaky but steady. "Ty was always proud of you, Lindy. He was proud of you every single day." Lindy nodded, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Amy didn't push. There were some things words couldn't fix, and sometimes it was enough to simply be there, to share the quiet weight of the moment. The bond between mother and daughter was all they had left of Ty, and in this silence, it was all they needed. The two of them stepped out of the truck together. The air felt cool against their skin, the distant rustling of the trees a soft soundtrack to their steps. Lindy was the first to move toward the memorial, her small frame carrying a bouquet of wildflowers, Ty's favorite, held delicately in her hands. Amy followed her, the weight of her own grief pulling at her chest. This place, so full of memories, had always been where they came to remember. And today, they had come again. Not to say goodbye, but to hold on to something they had lost, to keep him close even in his absence. When they reached the memorial, Amy hesitated for a moment, her eyes falling on the simple stone that stood as a silent reminder of the life they had lost. The same stone that bore Ty's name, his legacy, his love for them etched forever in time. She knelt slowly, the motion a familiar one. She placed her hand on the stone, as if reaching out to him, trying to feel his presence. The wind seemed to hold its breath, as if the earth itself was waiting for something. Amy and Lindy stood side by side, the air thick with unspoken words. There was a stillness here, but it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, full of everything they hadn't said over the years, every unasked question and every unspoken fear. For a long moment, neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. It felt as though the world had frozen around them, leaving. Just the two of them and the memory of Ty standing in the space between. Amy's gaze wandered across the horizon, her mind wandering to the days when Ty was still beside her. She could almost hear his laughter, feel his steady presence, the way he would always know exactly how to calm her fears. The thought brought a sharp pang in her chest. How could something so perfect be taken away so suddenly? Lindy broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "I miss him so much, Mom." The words hung in the air like a fragile thread, stretching across the distance between the present and the past. Amy didn't need to look at her daughter to feel the weight of those words. She knew exactly what Lindy meant, the ache behind them. It was a longing so deep it felt like it might swallow them whole. Amy turned to face her, her heart swelling with both love and sorrow. She reached out to pull Lindy into a gentle embrace, holding her tightly as if trying to shield her from the pain that seemed to seep from every corner of their lives. Lindy's small hands gripped Amy's back, as if she was holding on for dear life. The world outside was vast and wide, but in that moment, it was as if the only thing that mattered was the two of them, holding on to each other amidst the grief. "I know, sweetie," Amy whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I miss him, too. Every day." For a long time, they stood there, together in silence. It was a quiet morning, not just for Ty, but for the life they had once shared. There were no answers here, no magic words that could make the pain go away. Only the shared understanding that they had both lost a piece of their hearts, and that the road ahead would be different, no matter how hard they tried to pretend otherwise. Finally, Amy pulled back just enough to look into Lindy's eyes. "You know," she said softly, "he's always with us, even when we don't see him. He's in everything we do, in every choice we make." Lindy wiped a tear from her cheek, nodding slowly. It was hard to believe sometimes, but there was comfort in those words. Ty had been more than just a memory. He had been a part of their everyday lives, his spirit woven into the fabric of their family. It wasn't the same as having him there, but it was something. Something to hold on to when the world felt too big and too empty. Amy squeezed Lindy's hand, and together they turned back toward the memorial. There was still one thing left to do. The visit wasn't just about remembering, it was about healing. And sometimes healing started with a simple promise, to carry the ones we've loved with us, not just in our hearts, but in everything we do. Lindy stood beside her, head tilted downward, her gaze soft but distant. She gently set the flowers at the base of the memorial, her small fingers trembling as she adjusted them, making sure they were just right. The act, though simple, spoke volumes of love, of grief, and of a daughter who would never forget the man who had been her father, even if his touch was no longer there.